A brave nurse risks her life by crossing the border illegally to bring medicine to sick children. She knows that if she is caught, she could be executed, but she decides to keep going. Her mission is to save lives in secret, facing checkpoints, dangers, and choices that will change her future. The hospital was almost silent, but Nurse Mariana couldn't focus. Outside, the night felt darker than usual, and inside, quiet whispers carried the latest news through the halls. On the TV in the break room, a reporter repeated the same warning over and over. Anyone caught crossing the border with medicine without authorization will face the maximum penalty. Mariana turned off the screen. She didn't need to hear it again. She already knew what was happening. On the other side of the border, only a few kilometers away, the situation was critical. Fever was spreading among children and the elderly. There were no medicines, not enough doctors, and each day brought new rumors of more deaths. She knew this because some patients had managed to cross over and shared their stories. People were begging for help, but her own government had forbidden any form of assistance. Helping anyone across the border was considered treason, and anyone caught carrying medicine could face execution. Mariana tried to convince herself it wasn't her problem. She had patients here, in her own hospital. She had responsibilities. She knew she had no right to take such risks, but the image of sick children stayed in her mind. She was a nurse. She had sworn to save lives, no matter which side of the border they were on. That night, in the staff room, her colleagues discussed the situation. Some were angry about the restrictions. Others were scared. No one was willing to break the law. Mariana listened in silence, but deep inside, something was shifting. If anyone tries to cross, they won't come back, one doctor said, shaking his head. We can't risk it, not for them, another nurse replied. Mariana lowered her gaze. At that moment, she knew that if anyone was going to do it, it would have to be her. When her shift ended, she walked home slowly. The cold night wind seemed to push against her. Inside her small apartment, she set her bag on the table and sat down. In front of her was a photo of her mother and younger sister. They had no idea what Mariana was planning. She couldn't tell anyone. The phone rang. It was Lucia, a former patient who lived on the other side. Her voice was trembling. Mariana, there are children who can't breathe. The pharmacies are empty. We need help. Anything you can give us, please. Mariana didn't answer right away. She could hear a baby crying in the background. She closed her eyes and gripped the phone tightly. She couldn't ignore it. Deep down, she knew that this plea would stay with her forever. She hung up without giving a clear answer. Standing up, she opened the drawer where she kept some medicine and looked at each bottle carefully. It wasn't much, but it could save lives. She grabbed a notebook and started writing down what she would need to take. Her breathing quickened, and her hands shook. She knew she wasn't ready yet, that she needed a plan, that she couldn't act carelessly. But right then, she made the decision that would change everything. She was going to cross the border, even if it meant risking her own life. Before trying to sleep, if it could be called sleep, the reporter's words echoed in her head again. Maximum penalty. Treason. Execution. It all felt too big for her, but one thought weighed even more. The silence of the children she might save. She closed her eyes and whispered to herself, I'll do it. No matter what, I'll do it. Mariana didn't know how, but she knew that within the week her life would take a path with no return. What she couldn't imagine was that, very soon, someone from the other side would reach out for help directly, and that call would set a secret plan in motion. The phone rang again at dawn. Mariana, still exhausted from her long night shift, answered with a hoarse voice. Hello? On the other end, a trembling female voice spoke. Are you, Nurse Mariana? I'm Rosa, Lucia's sister. I need to talk to you. Mariana sat up in bed. She recognized the last name, and it put her on alert. Before she could reply, Rosa continued, her words stumbling from desperation. My son has a very high fever. He won't stop shaking. There are no medicines here. No doctors, please help us. Mariana swallowed hard and looked toward the window. The sun was barely rising. She closed her eyes for a second, trying to organize her thoughts, but Rosa kept talking. We don't know what to do. There are more sick children on the street. 2 neighbors have already lost their little ones. If you don't help us, they'll also. Rosa's voice broke. They'll also die. The silence after that sentence felt heavy, like a weight pressing on her chest. Mariana felt the air in the room thicken. In her mind, the images of those unknown children took shape. Sweaty faces, tired eyes, small hands reaching for help. She tried to stay calm. Rosa, how did you get my number? Mariana whispered, glancing at her closed bedroom door, as if afraid someone might overhear. Lucia gave it to me. She said you're the only one who could do something, Rosa replied softly. No one else dares. We're scared, but we have no choice. Mariana stayed silent for a few seconds, processing everything. She knew every word she heard was pushing her further down a dangerous path. She could hang up. She could say no. That would be the safest choice. But her heart was pounding. Rosa, I can't promise anything, she finally said. But I'll see what I can do. On the other end, Rosa's sobs of relief came instantly. Thank you. Thank you. God bless you. When the call ended, Mariana set the phone on the bed and covered her face with her hands. The weight of a decision she hadn't even made yet was already crushing her. Her stomach tightened. She knew this wasn't just a request for help. It was a warning. Time was running out for those children. She spent the rest of the morning working at the hospital, but her mind was elsewhere. While giving injections or checking prescriptions, Rosa's words replayed in her head. If you don't help us, they'll also die. Each time she heard a sob in the hallway or saw a child in the waiting room, her anxiety deepened. After her shift, Mariana stopped at a small cafe on the corner. She wanted to think clearly, but the city felt too loud, too alive, too indifferent. Across the border, in that small town, everything seemed to be fading away. Suddenly, her phone buzzed. It was a message from Rosa. Just 4 words. They won't last long. Mariana's heart skipped a beat. She took a deep breath and looked around. At the next table, 2 people were chatting casually about rising prices, unaware of the tragedy happening so close. For them, the border was just a line on a map. For Mariana, it was becoming the barrier between life and death. That night, when she got home, she turned on a small lamp and opened a blank notebook on the table. She wrote down the names of the children Rosa had mentioned. She didn't know their faces, but she decided she would learn them. She also listed the medicines they might need. As she wrote, tears threatened to fall, but she held them back. She didn't want to cry. She wanted to act. She glanced at the clock. It was late. She couldn't do anything that night. All she could do was wait and think. But she knew every passing minute mattered. She closed the notebook firmly and hid it in a secret drawer. In that simple gesture, without saying it aloud, her fate began to take shape. Before going to bed, she turned off all the lights and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling. The silence in the room clashed with the noise in her mind. Rosa's words echoed endlessly, impossible to stop. She understood now. If she didn't act soon, many lives would be lost. Mariana didn't have a plan yet, but one thing was certain. She could no longer ignore that desperate cry for help. The night was silent, but Mariana's mind couldn't rest. Rosa's words and the names of the children she had written in her notebook echoed endlessly in her head. There was no room for doubt anymore. She was going to help. But she knew she couldn't improvise. If she wanted to cross the border and come back alive, she needed a plan. A perfect one. She turned on the lamp on her table and opened the notebook again. On the first page, she wrote a single sentence. "If I fail, I don't come back." She stared at it for several seconds, fully aware of what it meant. Then she turned the page and began working. The first step was to gather the medicine. She couldn't take large amounts without raising suspicion. So, over the following days, she collected small doses little by little. A few antibiotic tablets, some syrups, painkillers, and fever reducers. She hid them in a cardboard box under her bed, wrapped in bandages and gauze so they would look like regular medical supplies. Mariana knew someone could suspect her at any moment. The hospital had strict controls. Inventories were checked often, and any irregularity could cost her job, or something much worse. That's why she acted calmly, showing no nervousness, making sure no one noticed the medicines she was setting aside. Next, she studied the routes. The border was full of checkpoints, but there were less guarded areas. A patient had once told her about a narrow path through a small forest that few people used because of wild animals. Mariana wrote down every detail. She looked at old maps, asked discreet questions to trusted people, and traced a route that, if everything went right, would help her avoid the main patrols. She spent several nights practicing her cover story in front of the mirror. If someone stopped her, she needed to look calm. She prepared short, simple answers. "I'm going to visit my aunt. I work at a hospital. I'm carrying first aid supplies. I'm not carrying anything forbidden." She knew that if she hesitated or stuttered, she would be exposed. So, she repeated each phrase over and over until it sounded natural. She also prepared her appearance. She couldn't dress like a nurse. She picked simple, worn clothes and a small bag where she could hide the medicine without drawing attention. She even practiced walking with steady steps, confident but not arrogant, natural but not timid. Every detail could make a difference. Meanwhile, at the hospital, her co-workers suspected nothing. During her shifts, Mariana kept smiling and doing her job as usual, but inside, everything felt different. Every time she heard them talking about executions at the border, a shiver ran down her spine. No one could know what she was planning. One afternoon, as she left her shift, she paused outside the break room and overheard two nurses talking about increased military security at the official crossings. That moment confirmed it. Her plan had to be even more careful. If she got caught, there would be no warnings, no second chances. At home, she spent hours preparing a small emergency kit. A flashlight, a basic first aid pack, a bottle of water, and a few bandages. She packed everything into a backpack along with the medicine. Every night, she checked it carefully, making sure nothing was missing and everything was well hidden. She knew that if anyone found that bag, everything would be over before it even began. When the bag was ready, she sat on her bed and took a sheet of paper. She wrote a letter to her mother and sister. She didn't explain her plan. She only told them that she loved them and that, no matter what happened, she wanted them to keep going. She folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. She hoped they would never need to read it, but she needed to leave something behind, just in case. The final step was mental. She could prepare medicines, maps, and cover stories, but she couldn't control fear. The thought of being caught and executed kept her awake at night. Yet, every time she thought about the children waiting for her help, the fear turned into strength. She repeated to herself again and again that she had to do this. One night, as she reviewed her plan one last time, she received a message from Rosa. "Thank you for trying. We have no one else." Mariana closed her eyes and took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. The plan was ready. The only thing left was the moment to put it into action. Night had fallen over the city, and the silence felt heavier than usual. Mariana looked one last time at the small backpack on her bed. Inside, the medicines were carefully wrapped. She checked everything again: flashlight, bandages, water bottle, and the folded map she had memorized countless times. She slung the backpack over her shoulder, took a deep breath, and left her apartment without turning on any lights. The cold air hit her as she stepped outside. She walked quickly through the nearly empty streets, following the exact plan she had practiced in her mind. 2 blocks later, she turned onto a side street to avoid the main avenue, where she knew there would be patrols. Her breathing was short, and the sound of her own footsteps felt too loud. Every shadow looked like danger. When she reached the edge of the city, the pavement ended, giving way to a dirt path leading into the forest. Mariana stopped for a few seconds, scanning her surroundings. No one was there. The silence was broken only by the sound of crickets and the crunch of branches under her shoes. She pulled out the map but kept her flashlight off, trusting her memory to guide her. The path was narrow and covered in thick vegetation. She crouched as she moved forward, pushing branches aside carefully to avoid making noise. In the distance, she could hear engines, military vehicles patrolling the border. Her heart was pounding so hard. She was afraid someone nearby might hear it. Every step had to be precise. A single mistake could cost her freedom or her life. Suddenly, a different sound broke the silence. Mariana froze. She held her breath and stayed perfectly still. A few meters away, she saw a moving glow between the trees, a searchlight. Dropping low, she hid behind a fallen log and waited. The beam of light swept slowly across the leaves, lighting up part of the path. The seconds stretched endlessly, but eventually, the guard walked away. Only then did Mariana breathe again. The closer she got to the border, the more difficult the terrain became. Mud made it hard to walk, and roots stuck out from the ground, forcing her to move carefully so she wouldn't trip. Moisture soaked her clothes, and the cold crept into her arms. She pressed the backpack against her chest and kept going, knowing the hardest part was still ahead: the checkpoints. The first checkpoint was about 200 meters away. Mariana dropped to the ground and crawled slowly through the bushes. She spotted 2 soldiers talking near a small fire. She couldn't hear their words, but she saw their rifles slung over their shoulders. One of them yawned and stepped a few meters away, giving her an opening. Holding her breath, she waited for the right moment and slipped past them silently, never looking back. The second checkpoint was harder. There was a watchtower and a rotating searchlight sweeping across the area. Mariana hid behind a large rock and studied the movement of the light. She counted softly under her breath. 1, 2, 3. The moment the beam turned to the opposite side, she crouched and ran toward a shadowed area. Her heart pounded violently, but she couldn't stop. Every meter forward was a victory. The forest grew denser, the branches catching on her clothes. In the distance, she heard barking. The soldiers were using dogs. Mariana clenched her teeth and tried to move faster without making noise. Dropping to the ground, she covered her backpack with dry leaves and hid among the bushes. The barking grew louder, and then, little by little, faded away. She waited several more minutes before standing up and continuing. The air was damp, and each breath felt heavy. Her hands trembled, not just from the cold, but from the tension gripping every muscle. Every snapping twig under her feet sounded like an alarm. Sometimes she felt as if someone was following her, though she knew it was probably just her mind playing tricks. Finally, she reached a small clearing. From there, she could see the faint lights of the border in the distance. The tall metal wall rose like a dark shadow. There were no visible cameras in this section, but she knew hidden ones might still be there. Mariana dropped low and crawled forward slowly, staying deep in the shadows. The last stretch was the most dangerous, an open space with no cover. She inhaled deeply, counted to 3, and sprinted as fast as she could. Her chest burned and her heart pounded wildly. But she made it across and hid behind a cluster of bushes on the other side. Panting heavily, Mariana looked back. She had crossed both checkpoints and the wall without being detected. But she couldn't relax. The hardest part was still ahead, reaching the meeting point without being caught. She closed her eyes briefly and clutched the backpack tightly against her chest. She had made it this far, but the danger was far from over. If you're enjoying this story, subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and give it a like to support the content. That way, you won't miss any upcoming chapters filled with tension and emotion. Let's continue. Mariana moved slowly through the bushes, trying to keep her breathing steady. She had already crossed the most dangerous part of the forest and thought the worst was over. But just as she took another step, a sharp sound came from her left. Before she could react, a bright light flashed across her face. "Stop right there," a firm voice shouted. The beam of the flashlight blinded her for a moment. Mariana's heart pounded so hard and so fast that it felt like her chest would burst. She slowly raised her hands, trying to look calm, though her entire body was shaking. In front of her stood an armed guard, dressed in a dark uniform with a stern expression. His gaze was sharp, and his voice left no room for doubt. "What are you doing here?" he asked coldly, pointing the flashlight straight at her backpack. Mariana swallowed hard, but didn't answer right away. She had practiced her cover stories, but in that moment, she forgot them all. The guard stepped closer, each footstep sounding like thunder in the silence of the forest. "The bag," he ordered. "Open it." Mariana's hands trembled as she slowly lowered the backpack and placed it in front of her. She knew the medicines were inside, neatly packed, and there was no way to hide them. Taking a deep breath, she unzipped the bag and let the guard see its contents. He picked up one of the boxes of antibiotics and examined it with a frown. "What's this? You know it's illegal to carry medicine across the border, right?" His tone was firm, but he didn't raise his voice. Mariana felt her throat tighten. She could lie and say they were for her family, but instead she chose the truth. Speaking softly but clearly, she said, "They're for the children on the other side. They're dying." The guard stared at her, surprised by her honesty. The tension between them was so thick it felt like the air had stopped moving. For what seemed like endless seconds, neither of them spoke. Then, the guard let out a deep sigh. "Do you know what happens if they catch you?" he asked quietly. Mariana nodded without hesitation. "Yes, I know." The guard looked down at the box of medicine in his hands, his grip tightening around the cardboard as though he were fighting with himself. Finally, in a lower voice, he said something that caught her off guard. "My son is sick too. We have nothing to give him." Mariana's eyes widened in surprise. Instinct told her this was her only chance. She leaned in slightly and whispered, "Take what you need, but let me go. I'm not doing this for politics or for money. I just want to save lives." The guard stared at her in silence. The seconds stretched like hours. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Follow the law or follow his conscience. Mariana held her breath, waiting for his decision. Finally, he lowered the flashlight, put the medicine back into the bag, and said quietly, almost in a whisper, "You didn't see me, and I didn't see you." Relief flooded through Mariana, though she didn't dare move yet. "Thank you," she whispered softly. The guard turned away, but paused before leaving. Speaking in a low voice, he added, "If you keep going straight, there's another checkpoint ahead. Take the path to the right. Follow the slope. It's longer, but you'll stay out of sight." Mariana nodded silently, grateful. She adjusted the backpack on her shoulder and walked forward slowly, her step steady and quiet. Every muscle in her body was still tense, but now she had a real chance of reaching her destination. As she followed the path the guard had described, the lights of the checkpoint faded into the distance. But she couldn't let her guard down. Every snapping branch under her feet and every gust of wind reminded her she still wasn't safe. When she reached a small clearing, she stopped to catch her breath. Closing her eyes, she let the rush of adrenaline ease little by little. Her legs felt weak, but she had to keep going. She knew the night could still change in an instant. That brief encounter with the guard had taught her something. Not everyone agreed with the ban, but it also reminded her that a single mistake could cost her life. Mariana had to move forward, now more aware than ever of the danger she faced. She tightened the straps of her backpack, took a deep breath, and continued along the forest path. She needed to move quickly. The sun would rise soon, and with daylight, the risk would grow even greater. The path grew narrower, but Mariana kept moving forward with steady steps. The guard's advice had worked. She had avoided another checkpoint. Her flashlight barely lit the way, and the damp forest air clung to her skin. Her breathing was heavy, but the thought of reaching the clinic kept her going. Finally, after almost half an hour of walking in silence, the forest began to open up. In the distance, through trees and shadows, she spotted a small wooden building with a faint light in the window. She quickened her pace but stayed cautious. She couldn't relax yet. Moving carefully, she approached the door, making sure no patrols were nearby. Once there, she knocked softly 3 times, just as Rosa had instructed in her message. The door opened slightly, and a tired-looking woman appeared. It was Rosa. Her eyes were red, as if she hadn't slept in days. When she saw Mariana, they filled with tears. "You made it," she whispered, trying to hold back her emotions. Mariana nodded, exhausted, and stepped quickly inside. The clinic was small and improvised. 2 old beds, a wooden table with a few medical tools, and nearly empty shelves filled the space. The faint smell of disinfectant barely masked the heavy air of fever and exhaustion. In one corner, several children lay on thin mats, some with damp towels on their foreheads. Their pale faces and soft groans showed just how urgent the situation was. Mariana set the backpack on the table and opened it. Rosa watched anxiously as she pulled out boxes of antibiotics, syrups, and bandages. Just then, Dr. Javier, a man in his 50s with trembling hands, emerged from the back room. "I didn't think you'd make it," he said, his voice unsteady as he checked the supplies. "These can save so many lives." Tears rolled down the doctor's cheeks as he held the medicines like they were gold. Mariana stayed silent, too drained to speak, but her eyes reflected relief. Every step, every risk had been worth it. Dr. Javier wasted no time. He began giving the first doses to the children, antibiotics to the sickest, syrups for those burning with fever. The little ones, weak but aware, looked at Mariana with eyes full of hope. A lump rose in her throat when one of them, barely audible, whispered, "Thank you." The silence in the room filled with soft breaths and sighs. The doctor and volunteers moved quickly, organizing what little they had. For the first time in weeks, there were enough medicines to try to save them. As Rosa helped prepare the doses, she glanced at Mariana repeatedly. "I don't know how to thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. Mariana interrupted her gently. "There's nothing to thank me for. The children are what matters." But Mariana couldn't stay long. Every passing minute increased the risk of someone noticing her absence at the hospital. If they discovered she had crossed the border, the consequences would be severe, not just for her, but also for those helping her. Once the first doses were given, the children started to calm down little by little. Some breathed easier, others stopped shaking. The tension in the room eased slightly, but Mariana knew she couldn't relax. She had to leave before sunrise. Dr. Javier approached her, his expression serious. "You need to go now. In a few hours, this area will be under tighter surveillance. If they catch you, everything we've done tonight will be for nothing." Mariana nodded. She packed the remaining supplies into her backpack and pulled her hood over her head. Before leaving, Rosa hugged her tightly. "Promise me you'll come back," she said, trying to hold back tears. Mariana couldn't answer. She simply looked into Rosa's eyes and nodded, though deep down she knew returning would only get harder. She slipped out the door and disappeared among the trees. The clinic faded behind her, but the sound of the children breathing easier stayed with her. That was her reward. But the danger wasn't over yet. The darkness was still her ally, but she knew every step on the way back would be as risky as the journey there. Exhaustion weighed on her, but she couldn't stop. She tightened the straps of her backpack, took a deep breath, and kept moving. She had saved lives that night, but now she had to save her own. The wind blew harder, and the darkness felt heavier than ever. Mariana had left the clinic with her heart racing, knowing that every second mattered. The children were safe, for now, but her mission wasn't over. She had to return. If anyone discovered she was missing from the hospital, questions would arise. If someone followed her, everything she had achieved could fall apart. She clutched the now empty backpack against her chest and stared at the forest separating her from her country. She couldn't take the same route back. The checkpoints would be on high alert, and with sunrise approaching, soldiers would be patrolling more aggressively. She chose a different path, a longer, riskier one, but with fewer chances of being seen. The ground was damp and slippery, covered in wet leaves that crunched no matter how carefully she moved. Each step was deliberate. The silence of the night amplified every sound. The flap of a bird's wings, the rustle of branches, even the pounding of her own heart. Every noise felt like it could betray her. As she moved, Dr. Javier's warning echoed in her mind. "If they catch you, everything will be for nothing." She stopped behind a fallen log and pulled out the small map she had memorized. Just ahead, she needed to turn onto a narrower path, running along a stream. The sound of the water would help cover her steps, but it also meant getting closer to an area frequently patrolled by soldiers. She took a deep breath, lowered her head, and continued. The icy water soaked through her shoes as she crossed the shallow stream, but she didn't stop. Every step felt slow, clumsy even, her fear tightening every muscle. One wrong move could end everything. Suddenly, she heard voices in the distance. Dropping instantly to the ground, she crawled into a patch of bushes. Two soldiers walked by, chatting as they crossed a small wooden bridge. Mariana held her breath, feeling the cold mud cling to her skin. She listened to them laugh and talk about their families until, finally, their voices faded. Only when silence returned did she get up, heart pounding, and continue forward. The sky was starting to lighten. A thin gray line hinted that dawn was near. Mariana knew daylight would be her worst enemy. If the searchlights didn't catch her, the morning sun would. She had to move faster, but carefully. After several tense minutes, she reached a more open area. Between two large rocks lay the final stretch, a steep slope leading directly to her country's border. The climb was brutal, the wet ground making her shoes sink into the earth. Every time she slipped, she grabbed at tree roots to keep from falling. Her muscles burned, but stopping wasn't an option. When she finally reached the top, she dropped to her knees, gasping for air. From there, she could see the faint lights of her city in the distance. It was strange, to be so close to safety but still trapped in danger. She still had to cross the final stretch without being seen. As she drew closer, the sounds of activity grew louder. Vehicles rumbling, hurried footsteps, barking dogs. Security had been tightened, She crouched behind a cluster of bushes and spotted 3 soldiers near a makeshift checkpoint. If she tried to pass there, she'd be caught. Her only chance was to take an even narrower, thorn-covered trail around it. The terrain became harsher, and exhaustion began to set in. Her hands bled from scratches, and the cold seeped into her bones, but she kept moving. Every meter gained was a silent victory. Finally, she found a spot where the barbed wire fence was loose. Kneeling down, she carefully pulled away some branches and, using a rock, lifted the wire just enough to crawl under. The cold metal tore her jacket, and for a moment, she feared the sound would draw attention. She held her breath, waited, and when nothing happened, slid quietly to the other side. She fell onto the damp ground, but forced herself up immediately. She ran toward the shadow of nearby trees, safe territory. Only when she was hidden from view did she stop. Taking a deep breath, she let the tears she'd been holding back all night finally fall. Mariana was back. No one would know what she had done. At the hospital, when she returned, she would act normal, as though nothing had happened. No one would see her trembling hands, the cuts on her arms, or the weight of exhaustion on her shoulders. No one would know that, in one night, she had defied both the law and death itself to save lives others had chosen to abandon. As she walked toward the city, the first lights of dawn began to brighten the sky. With each step, she realized she was no longer the same person who had left the night before. The border she had crossed wasn't just on a map anymore. It was inside her now. She had felt fear, danger, and the real possibility of never coming back. But she had also seen courage, hope, and the power of one decision. She knew she could never speak about what she had done. She would keep the secret to protect everyone. The children, the doctors at the clinic, and the guard who, with a single act of compassion, had given her the chance to succeed. But silence couldn't erase what she had lived through. Every sound of the forest, every sweep of a flashlight, every held breath was etched in her memory forever. Mariana understood that, even though she returned alive, a part of her had stayed behind that night. On that dangerous crossing between life and death, the woman who once doubted had been left behind, and someone new had emerged, someone who now understood the real price of courage. When she reached the city limits, the streets were already waking up. People walked by, unaware that while they slept, a nurse had risked everything to save strangers. Mariana looked around, and, for a brief moment, it felt like the world hadn't changed. But she had. She inhaled deeply and kept walking toward the hospital. The day was just beginning, but inside her, something had ended. She knew she might never cross the border again, but she didn't need to. The border now lived within her, an invisible scar she would carry for the rest of her life. If this story touched your heart, tell us in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to subscribe, turn on the bell, and give a like so you won't miss more stories like this one. See you next time!